Hi, everybody. Great. Thank you. Thank you to Women's Learning Partnership and the New School for this wonderful day. I hope that where do we go from here? It's a huge subject. I hope that where we go from here is that everyone will continue these discussions because the most important thing I'm here to say today is if you want UN Women to be the organization you want it to be, then you have to be proactive in trying to make it be that. Because I think, as June said at the very end, it's really important that we work toward our vision of UN Women, understanding that UN Women is the UN, and we are the NGO civil society community, and our job is both to push it, to hold it to be accountable, but also to try to provide ideas, visions, and possibilities for what UN Women can be. And in that regard, I was going to start just by saying that I think this whole day has been a wonderful, exciting moment for us because in many ways the founding of UN Women was somewhat dampened by coming into being in the midst of the worst economic crisis of the last 50 years, particularly given that all of us feel that it needs at least a $1 billion budget to do the job it has to do. So I've decided today that instead of money, we have the people's power of the social democracy movements and the NGOs, and we are actually the energy, and this discussion today about social movements has really kind of re-energized me that maybe this was the right moment, even if it wasn't the right moment economically. It's the right moment in terms of our sense of possibility. Remembering, as each of the social movements before, whether the 60s or the 89 movement or any other movement that you've been involved in anywhere in the world, that it's that belief that it can be different, that it can change, that is most important to the creation of UN Women. Because we didn't do this work, those of us who were involved in it, or you, for it just to be the same. Or even just the same with a little bit more money. We did it because we wanted to see a larger, more powerful vehicle for the visions and the voices of women's rights in the United Nations. And I think that really comes from the way in which NGOs and civil society lay claim to this. I want to start with just a couple of reflections from the panel before because it's so important to my vision of UN Women. And I think one of the key roles that UN Women can play is to raise the profile and bring more to visibility the voices of women activists all over the world. The voices of women who are defending the human rights and the rights of women at the grassroots in every national struggle, whether the struggles that we just saw that Karima brought to us, the women who are present, because so often we don't hear about the women who are doing this work. And if UN Women could do only one thing, it would be to make sure, as Bachelet said to us when she challenged us about what were women's views on climate change, on the economic crisis, etc. Well, there are women working on and talking about these things all over the world. But are those voices heard here in New York at the UN? How do we make UN Women a vehicle for hearing those voices and also for defending them? Because those voices are under attack in almost all parts of the world. So I would say one of the first tasks of UN Women is to raise the voices, the profile of women around the world, of the solutions and ideas that are coming from women locally, globally, and nationally. And secondly, to defend those women who are themselves human rights defenders, and to link to the conversation before, are often under attack because they are exercising their most fundamental human right, which is the right to participate, to speak, to play a role in creating whatever your society or your nation is about. And that, to me, is a part of the claim of the universality of human rights, is the right of women to be heard. And I think it's very important when we get into the universality and diversity discussion to remember that as a women's movement, we have always been about trying to go beyond dichotomies. And I think one of the most destructive dichotomies for women's rights claims today is the dichotomy that has been set up between universality and diversity. We are about both. We are about the universal right of every woman, everywhere, whether that's marginalized voices like lesbians or marginalized voices like Roma women or marginalized voices of women in rural areas and grassroots communities without the internet. We are about the right of the universal right of all women to claim their rights and to have those same fundamental rights. But it doesn't mean that all those women's experiences or way of building or developing strategies will be the same. And that is where our diversity must come to play, because women everywhere will shape specific strategies, specific solutions, and have specific debates and arguments with each other, because there will never be and shouldn't be any one woman's position anywhere. And it is the right of women to engage in that that is the universal human rights claim. So I think we must be very clear that when they say women's rights are human rights, when we say women's rights are human rights, it's not just a rhetoric. It is about women's claim to be present in all of these debates, and it must be core to the defense of women in the UN work on UN women. And the claim to human rights is not just rhetoric, so I hope that the next time we get to talk to Undersecretary General Bachelet, we can talk about why her statement about going beyond human rights, I don't think it's going beyond. I think it's making specific what the human rights claims really mean in building the case for stronger support of women. So I hope that we will keep that human rights frame very clear in the work of UN Women, which then brings me to the challenge I want to leave with all of us for the way forward, which is we have outlined as the part of the GEAR campaign, and many of you have seen it, 6 points around civil society participation. You can go to the GEAR website, www.gearcampaign.org, or pick up our literature to see the 6 points. They're pretty obvious things like thematic advisors and advisory committees and so forth. What I think is the challenge for us is when we get at those tables, what are we going to say? When we get at those tables, do we have clarity about how we want to use and make the most strategic advantage of now having UN Women? Not are we going to wait for UN Women to solve all the problems of women, but how do we want to use the presence now of an Undersecretary General who has the ear of the Secretary General of the UN? How are we going to use the upgraded presence at the country level of UN Women having a mandate to be a part of planning of the UN's programs at the country level? How are we going to use this strengthened voice to make a strategic leap forward on the issues that we care about? So my challenge to you is, what do we see as the strategic advantage of UN Women? How do we think it can be a greater force within the UN for women's rights? Not just that we want it to do everything, but what are the places? We worked for a long time to get violence on the human rights agenda. What's the next step? The UN can't solve violence against women. We saw it's on the 5 thematic areas. We know it's always on people's minds. What's the next step? What do we want UN Women to help us do in the struggle around an issue like violence against women? What is the strategic point of entry that UN Women offers us? How do we use it to lift up voices that aren't being heard, to propel discussion? When I heard Bachelet talking about the social protection package, the social protection floor, my first question was, what's a social protection floor for women around violence against women? What would it mean to actually have that security and that protection? How could we link this to something that she's doing not only as UN Women, but in the ILO, with the WHO? How do we think bigger about where we want to make those connections? I think she also gave us a really important challenge in thinking about how we prepare ourselves for being at the tables that we want her to open the door to. How do we have the discussion on the global macroeconomic problems that many women are now looking at? How do we take this opportunity to say, these are the things we want to see UN Women bringing to those institutions. It's not, and I think it's really important, it's not a substitute. UN Women is not a substitute for the movement. It is a part of our strategy. It must be something that we don't wait to say, what will they do, but we start to present proposals. We asked, many of you contributed in December for proposals to present to UN Women for part of their first 100 days. But I have to say that we only got 22 from the whole world, and we have a pretty large mailing list. So this made me think that actually we need to do a lot of thinking, not just everything we're doing, but where can the UN make a difference? Where would you see a role for the UN? This is not an agency that's going to have projects in every country that are going to solve all the problems. But where would it intervene in your strategy planning for women's economic empowerment? Where could it intervene at every level so that as we go forward with these demands for space, for being at the table, we are also going forward with a clear agenda of what we want at that table. And as a final voice for me, I would say that one of the first things I want to take to that table is the protection of the right of women everywhere to be in the discussion is, in fact, a human rights protection. And the women have to be there in all their diversity, but we as the women who are there also have to be prepared to bring very clear thinking, our own strategies, our own steps forward, and that's one of the tasks that I hope we'll engage in over the next year. Thank you.